If you've ever bought a watch and felt like it was lackluster, it wasn't comfortable, or it just didn't feel right on the wrist, there's a good chance you ignored a key aspect of the design while deciding what to buy. Pretty much everyone focuses on the dial, case design, and movement when buying a watch, and that's completely fair. Those are what makes the watch what it is after all. But what's often overlooked is a component of the watch that you feel every moment it's on your wrist: the bracelet. In my opinion, the humble stainless steel bracelet is slept on way too much in the watch collector's space, at least when it comes to prioritization. It's ironic that the part of the watch that contributes most to the comfort is set aside as an afterthought by many. Today, I want to discuss why I think the bracelet is actually one of the most important considerations in a watch purchase, and what to look for and prioritize to maximize your wearing experience. While I understand the sentiment of focusing on the main head and dial when deciding on a watch, I believe it is a mistake to see a bracelet as just the component that holds the watch onto your wrist. The bracelet is so much more, as it serves as a direct extension of design and aesthetic of the watch head. And not only this, but a majority of the wearing experience of a watch comes directly from the strap or bracelet. To ignore the bracelet is to ignore the largest and arguably most important aspect of comfort and aesthetic quality of the entire piece. Take for example my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference. I'd say I can comfortably pull off a watch up to about 48 millimeters in lug-to-lug length. If you actually think about the real estate of your wrist and what's taking up the most space, the bracelet is taking up nearly 70% of my 160 millimeter wrist circumference. I feel when you put it this way, it would sound completely ridiculous to disregard the aesthetic of nearly 3/4 of the entire watch on your wrist. Whether you like it or not, a luxury watch is essentially jewelry, a fancy bracelet that tells time. You may be watching this and still have a preference for leather straps or NATOs, and that's alright. But you cannot tell me that the metal watch bracelet isn't extremely popular in the watch world. I think the resurgence of the integrated bracelet aesthetic all but proves this already. I also don't think that it's a coincidence that the best-selling Swiss brand, Rolex, is also considered to have some of the best bracelets in the industry. As a certified bracelet enjoyer, I feel the need to plead my case of why you really should be prioritizing the bracelet for your next watch purchase. The dial, movement, and case aesthetic will always be the most intriguing and important parts of a watch for most people. But just the watch head lacks the quality of a cohesive wearing experience that a great bracelet brings. Ideally, a nice bracelet should extend the design language of the case around your wrist to the clasp, and bring the entire watch together as one solid unit. An amazing bracelet makes the watch feel naked without it. I even believe that a watch with otherwise unimpressive specifications can be elevated above other watches just from the bracelet experience alone. Think of it like an amazing dial, one that makes you forget about everything else in the watch because of just how beautiful it looks. This is what the bracelet can be if the finishing, build quality, and design are on point. Ironically, you often see the reverse with Grand Seikos, where the dial is such a draw, the bracelet and the rest of the design is begrudgingly accepted in exchange for it. Now just imagine the best of both worlds, and you can see just what I'm talking about. This is all without even mentioning the clasp or micro adjustment either, which can potentially be one of the largest factors that contributes to the comfort of the watch. With micro adjust, you have the ability to change the bracelet sizing throughout the day as your wrist swells and contracts. Getting the perfect fit on your watch at any time significantly improves the comfort and wearing experience, and it cannot be understated how important this can be depending on where you live. And when it comes to industry-leading micro adjustment, surprise surprise, Rolex is once again leading this in many regards. Perhaps if other companies want to get to the popularity of Rolex, they should begin introducing wearing experience features such as this. I can say personally that ever since I got a watch with micro adjustment in the clasp, I feel like I almost can't have a watch without it. It's a feature that sounds like a gimmick, but you actually end up using it almost every time you wear the watch if it has micro adjust that's good enough. Overall though, what I'm really getting at here is that if you start to look at the watch in a cohesive way and prioritize the bracelet as you should, you can get an elevated experience and aesthetic above so many other watches at the price point you're aiming at. It'll feel more quality, like you're getting the entire package, once you get that one watch and bracelet combo that just works. I don't think you're ever going to be upset that you found a watch that was too comfortable, or the design language was just too well thought out. I feel that perhaps I've discussed enough on why I think the bracelet is such an important consideration for a watch purchase. But how do you actually prioritize a bracelet and know what to look for to find a good one? Well, for starters, take note of the dimensions of the bracelet and try to get an idea of how it would fit on your wrist. This is rarely discussed, but a wider bracelet is going to feel bulkier and less comfortable on your wrist generally, and this goes hand in hand with the taper of the bracelet as well. This ties right back into what I mentioned earlier. Simplistically, a watch is a bracelet when you're wearing it. Imagine two popular chronographs, the Omega Speedmaster Professional and the Breitling Navitimer. Both of these watches have a similar watch head size, all things considered. But the bracelet on the Speedmaster is 20mm wide and tapers down to around 15mm. The Navitimer, on the other hand, is 22mm wide, with a taper down to 18mm. The Navitimer is going to wear wider and bulkier on the majority of your wrist, and this isn't even taking the thickness of the links into consideration. Just doing some back of the napkin math, the Navitimer's bracelet takes up roughly 15% more surface area on the wrist than the Speedmaster's. You can't tell me that the Speedmaster's bracelet isn't going to feel sleek in comparison. Now, I'm not saying the Navitimer is a bad watch, bracelet, or not worth buying, but pretty much nowhere in reviews, and definitely not in spec sheets, will you ever get a sense of the bulkiness the bracelet size introduces, especially considering that the Navitimer lacks a micro adjustment clasp, which the Speedmaster also has. Speaking of micro adjust, I think this could be the single most important feature of a bracelet that can elevate it above other watches in the same category. I probably don't need to go into too much detail on how important I think this feature is, but suffice to say that if you're spending a lot of money on a watch, they better have thought the wearing experience out for you when your wrist changes sizes. It's all a balancing act though, because different micro adjust clasps are not created equal. The number of micro adjust settings is a significant factor to consider, as well as the clasp sizing because of the system that's included. Just as I mentioned, the bracelet link width can influence the weight and feel of a watch, the clasp can affect this in the same way, even more so. Many micro adjustment clasps are quite long, thick, and bulky. This is extra important if you have small wrists, as some clasps can be so long that they span the entire underside of your wrist, which looks and feels quite strange. Try looking at reviews, images, or videos of the clasp if you can, because you better believe nearly no watch manufacturer is going to list clasp length or thickness on the specification sheets. The build quality is something to pay special attention to as well, although it's probably the hardest to gauge without actually handling the watch in person. In general, a bracelet with hollow end links is going to feel significantly lower quality and flimsier than a solid end link. Most of the time, I'd say you can't really tell that much when looking at the watch, but the more wear and use a bracelet gets, the more play the hollow end links are going to have, causing them to wiggle and jangle around a bit. The jangliness in general is a pretty good indicator of bracelet quality too, and I've seen some enthusiasts do what I like to call the rattlesnake test to demonstrate this. A bracelet with a higher build quality, that is to say, tighter tolerances, more accurately made parts, and a smarter design, should feel solid and be able to articulate easily without rattling around constantly, like you'll get with cheaper bracelets such as Seiko or vintage watches. The drape and articulation in general of the bracelet is another aspect to note, because depending on your wrist geometry, a bracelet with, say, male end links may not curve to your wrist how you would think. Integrated bracelet watches are notorious for this, and it's a reason why many say that they wear larger than their listed size. Finally, the aesthetics and finishing of the bracelet is of course very important. A large amount of this is to personal taste, but I think by and large a bracelet with great finishing can be recognized easily. The level of polishing and texture of the brushing, and how cohesive it meshes with the design philosophy of the case are good places to start. A high quality bracelet will have a well thought out design and subtle details that you may not always realize. Different facets, beveled edges, polished link sides, unique link designs, and screws instead of pin and collar systems are important aspects to note. In general, when you see the bracelet in person and feel it in your hands and on your wrist, you can just tell when the bracelet is cheap and an afterthought. When it comes to the design of the bracelet, originality and a cohesive design language are always going to go a long way. Think of bracelets like you would with movements. Many brands will just have a third-party designed or manufactured bracelet. Just as many will pop an ETA movement inside the watch and call it a day. Not to say that this is bad per se, but when you think of the most iconic watches of all time that are on bracelets, the Speedmaster, Submariner and Datejust, Santos, AP Royal Oak, you can almost always identify them at a distance by just the bracelet alone. These designs are the in-house movements of the bracelet world. Every brand and watch isn't going to achieve this feat, but an amazing watch and bracelet combo is iconic in its own right and immediately recognizable. Next time you're shopping around for a watch, give some thought into how unique and interesting the bracelet actually looks, and what the aesthetic brings to the entire package. Now, the theory of what makes a quality bracelet is all fine and dandy, but in practical and actionable terms, what are some brands and examples of good bracelets? For starters, comfort is partially a subjective thing, so if I mention a brand or bracelet you have being low quality and you like it, that's completely fine. Some people genuinely enjoy cheap and jangly bracelets. Typically though, most don't enjoy bracelets that don't fit well and that pull on the arm hairs. For quality bracelets, you have a lot of options at different price brackets, which typically improves as the price increases. On the lower end, you need to be careful about your choices when it comes to bracelets. Many budget brands have to make compromises and cost-cutting measures to keep their products lower priced, and the bracelets are usually one of the first elements to get hit by this. In this segment, I would go with specific micro brands or whatever you feel is comfortable or aesthetically pleasing to you. Unexpectedly, I've actually heard that San Martin is improving a lot in the budget space when it comes to bracelets, which is something I never thought I'd be saying. There are aftermarket bracelet manufacturers as well, such as Forstner, which produces a great product with micro adjustment for the price. Moving up a little bit above the lowest end, you start to move into some good options. Christopher Ward, Monta, and Formex, I've heard, all have great bracelets with micro adjustment, with some distinct design languages as well. Major brands, not so much though. You're never going to hear great things about bracelets of major conglomerate-owned brands in the sub $2,000 price range typically. In the general middle luxury segment, you have a ton of great options with the major brands. If you can get over the faux rivets, Tudor makes a great bracelet with the T-Fit clasp system. Omega has micro adjustment, of course, on many of their bracelets, and I can vouch for the Speedmaster bracelet being extremely comfortable and visually distinct. I've heard great things about Cartier bracelets too, if you can find a good fit at least. Finally, IWC is a serious contender for the best bracelets at this price range, with amazing micro adjustment, aesthetic, and finishing. This isn't a surprise though, as their bracelets are made by Brogioli, who make bracelets from Moser, Glashütte Original, and on the Longa Odysseus. In the higher end of the luxury segment, Rolex, of course, is the first name to come to mind, and although they are extremely overhyped in my opinion, I cannot deny that they make a great, class-leading bracelet with their glide lock technology. As I mentioned before, Glashütte Original and Moser have amazing bracelets as well. As for micro brands, I personally have experience with Orage, which I've been extremely pleased with as far as comfort and fit goes. Parmigiani Fleurier also comes to mind as a standout choice in this range. And finally, at hot horology levels, you probably can't go too wrong regardless of what you choose. And you better not if you're spending someone's yearly salary on a single watch. The name that comes up time and time again in this range is the Vacheron Constantin Overseas, that has a butterfly clasp with micro adjust, quick change links, and an extremely cohesive design aesthetic with sublime finishing. I've heard the AP Royal Oak bracelets are great as well, and they certainly look the part, but be aware that they do lack micro adjustment, which for me is sort of a mortal sin at this price bracket. I won't spend a ton of time in this segment because I like to remain positive for the most part, and I'm not a huge fan of ripping down brands, especially those that some people have come to love. But when it comes to lower quality bracelets, a few names and ideas come to mind. On the lower end, you essentially have a minefield of lower quality bracelets, as I mentioned earlier. You're not going to be getting anything great at these prices most of the time, but that's generally fine if you're willing to accept that. For the price and quality, Seiko springs out to me as the name everyone thinks of here. The bracelets are jangly, hollow end links on lower end models, almost never have micro adjustment, and just overall feel like an afterthought. This generally extends to many brands around this segment too, Citizen, Tissot, and Longines somewhat as well. Really, the warning signs for a lower quality bracelet are twofold. If your bracelet has hollow end links, a stamped clasp, friction fit without buttons, jangly with bad tolerances, and is uninspired in the design department, you probably aren't dealing with something that's worth considering if you're looking for a nice wearing experience. This is generally going to be your budget or inexpensive brands and vintage watches. You can learn to love their quirks, but don't delude yourself into thinking you've got a gem of a bracelet on your hands if it has most of these qualities. Now let's say that you're buying a higher end watch that doesn't immediately signal any of these traits. Many people still would consider several brands to have lackluster bracelets for the price. Grand Seiko is of course the obvious candidate here, as I mentioned earlier. Objectively, the bracelets on these watches are pretty decent. They have nice finishing, push button clasps, and fit the design aesthetic of their watches fine. For a watch in the $5,000 to $10,000 range though, they miss the mark in a lot of ways. The more you pay for a watch, the more the bracelet should seek to move towards perfection in the wearing experience. Grand Seiko bracelets lack almost any taper, and overall feel quite bulky, especially considering the elegance the brand is trying to exude. They obviously lack micro-adjust in anything but the newest Ice Forest model, and all of them are male end link, which makes the watches wear even bigger. As I said, they're fine bracelets, but when you're considering a watch purchase, the price has a huge impact on the acceptability of what you're getting. If you're paying premium prices, you better be getting premium comfort, and that starts with the bracelet, first and foremost. And speaking of premium comfort and pricing, today's obscure reference fits right in with this discussion of high-quality bracelets. Brogioli is responsible for some of the best bracelets in the watch industry, and I think a lot of their work is largely slept on, especially with Glashütte Original. Glashütte Original is a brand most collectors have come to associate heavily with high-end German dress watches fitted with a leather strap. What makes today's obscure reference obscure is not only that it's a sporty integrated bracelet design within a dressy catalog, but also its usage of a bracelet in a brand rarely associated with such, and a great bracelet at that. The Glashütte Original 70s chronograph panorama date is a mouthful of a name, but for good reason, because this is a fascinating watch packed full of features. To begin with, the case design on this watch is strange, being rectangular in shape and heavily inspired by vintage watches from the 70s. Of course, it's a chronograph, but an unusual one in my opinion. Unlike most dual subdial chronographs that only count up to 30 minutes, the 70s chronograph actually has a 12-hour totalizer right above the center towards 12 o'clock. This is quite the unique design, and I'm unsure if I've ever seen another like it. Naturally, this watch also has the big panorama date the brand has become known for at 6 o'clock, and a subtle power reserve indicator at 9 o'clock on the second subdial. The movement is beautifully finished as usual for the brand, and it comes in a variety of colors and strap variations too. But what makes this watch relevant to this video is the bracelet. I just can't seem to wrap my head around why the bracelets for this brand are so slept on. Not only are they aesthetically pleasing with great finishing and a cohesive aesthetic, but the micro adjustment is some of the best in the industry, and certainly the coolest implementation. Flipping the bracelet over, the clasp includes the Glashütte logo, which is actually the button used for the micro adjustment, of which there are a ton of settings to get the perfect fit. I consider it a huge shame that I've been cursed with wrists on the smaller side, because I think this watch would be a sort of a grail for me otherwise. But alas, it's a bit of a thick and chunky watch, like most of the Glashütte catalog, meant for wrist on the average to larger side. Regardless, this has got to be one of the most unique watches Glashütte makes, and certainly one of the coolest as well. Ever since I was a child, I've been a big fan of bracelets. They almost always make or break a watch for me, and I often feel that I can't buy one without one. I hope that in this discussion, I was able to convey a bit of what makes them so important to me, and that you give the bracelet a bit more of a consideration for your next watch purchase. Prioritize a cohesive overall aesthetic with great finishing, a nice taper, and a quality milled clasp, hopefully with micro adjust. Think about how much thought and care went into the bracelet on the watch you're considering, because most of the comfort you'll experience when wearing it every day will come from the bracelet's design, tolerances, and articulation. Hopefully it helps you in your next decision and you end up being even happier with what you choose. What do all of you think about bracelets in the context of the watch world? Are you big bracelet fans like me, or do you tend to stay more on the strap end of things? Do any of you have bracelets you love that I mentioned, or ones that I didn't? Let me know about any brands, watches, or topics you'd like for me to cover in future videos. Thank you for taking the time to watch.